everybody. I miss everybody so much. I hope everybody's been staying inside and keeping safe and washing your hands real good. I am going to teach you guys today. We are on Unit 4, Week 3. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so let's get started with our question of the week. Our question of the week is, how can people connecting or joining together improve their community? So how can you and your friends and your family come together and work as a team to improve your community? Let's look at our little chart right here. So it says that this is about community care. In the middle, our topic is people can show they care about their communities in many different ways. So look at this picture real quick right here. And let's just think about maybe what they're doing to help their community. Let's look at all these pictures and just think, how are these people helping improve their community? So right here it says that people can work together to pick up litter in parks and along roads. So when we used to work together, sometimes we would help clean up at recess outside, and we would help. That was one way that we as a class helped our community. It helped our school. Over here it says that people can work together to build homes for those who do not have them. People can make their community bright and colorful by painting a mural. Right here it says that people can work together to clean cars at a car wash, and people can develop friendships by having a street festival. So let's think, what's something people can do in your community that together to help it become a better place? One way that I like to help out in my community is I like to recycle. If I'm walking somewhere and I see that there may be some trash on the ground, I like to pick it up. But I always make sure that I wash my hands after. And I know you guys are really helpful around your community too, okay? So let's talk about the genre of the stories that we're going to be reading for this week, okay? The genre this week is realistic fiction. Who remembers the difference between fiction and nonfiction? When I think of fiction, I think of fib. So that means something that's not true. When I think of nonfiction, then that means that it is true. So if something is realistic fiction, what does that mean? That means that, well, if something is realistic, I hear the word real in there. So that means that it's something that is true. Fiction we know is not true. So we have realistic, something that's real, and fiction, something that is not true. When you have a realistic fictional story, that means that it's a story that is believable. Something that it didn't happen, but maybe it could happen. So let's watch this video real quick on what realistic fiction is.
Hi, this is your friendly library lady. Today we are going to be talking about genre. Genre is a French word that means type or kind. And in the library, we can have genre fiction and genre nonfiction. Today we will be learning about a fictional genre called realistic fiction. Think about these words. Realistic is like real, and fiction are stories. So these are stories that could happen in real life. They seem true to life, but the stories come from the author's imagination. Here are some more characteristics of realistic fiction. The setting is of the world as we know it. You won't find any magical schools, but a school similar to the one you attend. The stories are believable. You can imagine yourself as a character in the story. Everyday modern language is used. Let's face it, you won't hear, "The lady doth protest too much," or "Golly gee willikers." The problems in the stories are the ones we encounter every day. They could deal with families, school, growing up in nature. And the characters solve their own problems. The characters are human. If there are magical creatures, ghosts or aliens, it's not realistic fiction. And those talking cats and dogs? Not here too. So let's look at a realistic fiction book. In A Week in the Woods by Andrew Clements, we have a boy going on a 5th grade field trip. Have you ever gone on one? But during this trip, he gets mad at his teacher and gets lost. Again, has this ever happened to you? Finally, using his brains, he figures out how to find his class. So remember, realistic fiction are stories that you can picture yourself in. Any questions?
Okay, so let's go ahead and look at this anchor chart. First, I'm going to look at this page right here where it says realistic fiction. Realistic fiction is a made up story that could really happen. It has characters, a setting, and events that make up the beginning, middle, and end of the story. Realistic fiction often has a theme or a big idea about life. To determine the theme, as you read, stop at different points and ask yourself what the story is about so far. So while we're reading, we're going to be stopping every now and again and just making sure that we understand what we have read so far. Also, connect events to find how they are related. After reading, ask yourself what message the author wants you to learn. Okay, the purpose for reading a realistic fiction might be to enjoy a good story and to understand its theme or message about life. So let's look at this realistic anchor chart over here. This is a realistic fiction anchor chart. So in the middle, it says realistic fiction. One of the things that realistic fiction has is a setting, and a setting is where and when the story takes place. So right now, our setting would be at home, but normally our setting would be in a classroom. Characters are the people or the animals in the story. A realistic plot events make up the beginning, middle, and the end of a story. There's that word again, realistic. And there is a theme, which is a big idea or a lesson the author wants you to understand from the story. All right, so just like in class, before we read our story of the week, I like to go over the vocabulary. So let's look at our vocabulary right here. This first word is inhaled. So if you inhale, that means you breathe in. Everybody breathe in and count to, let's breathe in and count to 3 and then breathe out. Okay, ready? Breathe in. Breathe out. All right, the next word is plots. Plots are small pieces of land used for a purpose. A mural is a large picture painted directly on a wall. We have a mural in our school when we are walking down the stairs like we're about to go to PE. If you look to your left, or if you look to your right, there's like this orange mural that some students at Versia did years ago, and it's really, really beautiful. All right, this next word is faded. So that means it's lost its freshness. I don't know how many of you guys ever have worn some clothes or a shirt so much and washed it so much that the color starts to kind of slowly fade away or disappear. It doesn't look as new or as fresh anymore. And the last word is drooped or hung down. So sometimes maybe if you ask your parents for something and they say no, sometimes you might kind of droop over or just kind of hang down, hang your shoulders down a little bit. Okay? So knowing these words will help you understand the story that we're about to read, which is called The Garden of Happiness. As we read the story, we are going to figure out, what do these words tell me about the story? All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Our book is called The Garden of Happiness. It is written by Erica Tamar, and it is illustrated by Barbara Lambase. Who remembers what this word right here, illustrated, means? I hope you said it's the person that draws the pictures and not the person that writes the pictures, because you can't write a picture, you have to draw a picture. All right, let's go ahead and get started. On Marisol's block near East Houston Street, there was an empty lot that was filled with garbage and broken, tired things. It had a funky smell that made Marisol wrinkle her nose whenever she passed by. One April morning, Marisol was surprised to see many grown-ups busy in the lot. Mr. Ortiz carried a rusty refrigerator door. Mrs. Willie Mae Washington picked up newspapers, and Mr. Singh rolled a tire away. Go ahead and look at these pictures. These are some pretty interesting pictures. As I read, I wonder what the theme of the story is going to be. I also am going to look at the illustrations or the pictures for clues. The colors are bright and lively. The title of the story is obviously about a garden, so I'm going to continue reading the story to see how happiness can be compared to things that grow in a garden. So I think this may lead to me understanding the theme of the story. I can also think about the characters that I've met so far. So think about it. I want you to just think in your mind, who are the characters that we've thought about already? And remember, if you have a name, it's going to be capitalized. So I can kind of look through here and see, well, we know East is probably not the name of somebody. So we have Marisol, that's one character, Mr. Ortiz, Mrs. Willie Mae, and Mr. Singh. So far, we've gotten introduced to 4 characters. So these are people in the neighborhood, and it also tells us what each person is doing. The next afternoon, Marisol saw people digging up stones. Mr. Ortiz worked with a pickaxe. ¿Qué pasa? Marisol asked. Mrs. Willie Mae Washington leaned on her shovel and wiped her forehead. I'm gonna grow me black-eyed peas and greens and sweet potatoes, too, she said, like on my daddy's farm in Alabama. No more store-bought collard greens for me. We will call it the Garden of Happiness, Mr. Singh said. I am planting velour, such a beautiful vine of lavender and red. Yes, everyone is happy when they see this bean from Bangladesh. On another day, Marisol watched Mr. Castro preparing the ground. Mrs. Rodriguez rolled a wheelbarrow full of peat moss. Marisol inhaled the fresh soil smell of spring. Oh, I want to plant something in the Garden of Happiness, Marisol said. Too late, Nina, Mr. Ortiz said. All the plots are already taken. So on this, I noticed that the illustrations are helping to tell the events of the story. So the illustrations on these last 2 pages, one shows an empty lot and then people clearing the lot. So the illustration here shows that people are digging in the lot. And if I pay attention to the illustrations, I can see the events in the stories as they happen. So make sure you're looking at these pictures as we're moving along. Marisol looked everywhere for a leftover spot, but the ground was crisscrossed by markers of sticks and string. She looked and looked. Just outside the chain-link fence, she found a bit of earth where the sidewalk had cracked. Mira, here's my patch, Marisol called. It was no bigger than her hand, but it was her very own. She picked out the pebbles and scraped the soil with a stick. Marisol noticed a crowd of teenagers across the street from the lot. They were staring at a brick wall. It was sad and closed up, without windows for eyes. Marisol crossed over to ask what they were doing. City Arts is giving us paint to make a mural on the wall, a girl told her. What will it be? Marisol asked. Don't know yet, one of the big boys said. We haven't decided. I'm making a garden, Marisol said. I haven't decided either about what to plant. In the Garden of Happiness, the ground had become soft and dark. Mr. Castro talked to his seedlings as he placed them in straight rows. Come on now, little baby things. Grow nice and big for me. So as I read, I pay attention to details that could tell me about the theme. So I want to look for ideas that are important to the characters in the story. I can tell that finding a plot of land is very important to Marisol because she looked and she looked right here. So that means that this is something that she really wanted to find. And she didn't stop until she found a small piece because it was her very own. So I think it is important that the characters in the story are finding places that they can make their own. Okay? I also asked myself, what's the most important ideas? So I wonder, what will this mural be? And will it be important? And I wonder what the teenagers are going to decide to put on there. I wonder if there's going to be a connection between the mural and the Garden of Happiness. So we got to keep reading, find out. Marisol had no seedlings or even small cuttings or roots. What can I do? She thought. Where can I find something to plant? She went to the corner where old Mrs. Garcia was feeding the pigeons. Marisol helped herself to a big flat seed. The birds fluttered about angrily. Only one, she told them, for my garden. So let's look at these pictures so we can understand what's happening. What do you think is happening right here in this picture? I see Marisol reaching towards the ground, and she's surrounded by pigeons. There's also a woman on the bench who's feeding the pigeons from a paper bag. I see a small, if you look closely, you can see a small little seed in Marisol's hand. So I think that she's going to take that seed to plant something in her garden. Marisol skipped back to her patch. She poked a hole with her finger, dropped in the seed, and patted the soil all around. And every single day that spring, Marisol carried a watering can to the lot and gave her seed a cool drink. Looks like she's working pretty hard. She looks like she may make a difference in her community, so that might make her happy. So that might be important for the theme. Before long, a green shoot broke through in Marisol's patch. Even on rainy days, she hurried to see the light. Soon there were 2 leaves on a strong, straight stalk, and then there were 4, and it became as high as Marisol's knees. Green things were growing all around in the Garden of Happiness. Mr. Castrol's tiny seedlings became big, bushy things with ripe tomatoes shining like rubies. "What's my plant?" Marisol asked. Now it reached to her shoulder. "What's it gonna be?" "Dunno," Mrs. Willie Mae Washington answered, "but it sure is something." I think we read this story already. I wonder how many of us remember what it is that it's gonna be. Marisol pulled out the weeds in the late afternoons when it wasn't so summer hot. Sometimes she watched the teenagers. "I come from the factory and breathe the fresh air," he said. Oh, let's go back. Sometimes she watched the teenagers across the street. They measured the wall, they talked and argued about what they would paint, and often Marisol saw Mr. Ortiz in his plot, resting in a chair. "I come back from the factory and breathe the fresh air," he said, "and I sit among habachuelas, my little piece of Puerto Rico." "Is my plant from Puerto Rico? Do you know what it is?" Marisol asked. Mr. Ortiz shook his head and laughed. "Muy grande. Maybe it's Jack's beanstalk from the fairy tale." Do y'all think it's going to be a Jack Beanstalk? Could be. So if we look at page 340, which is this page right here, she's watching and she's listening to the teenagers plan the mural. So I wonder what they decide they're going to paint. I wonder what the rest of the community thinks about this mural. Seems like people growing things in a garden is something that might bring people together. I also noticed that there's a lot of Spanish words in this text. So I asked myself a question about this. What does it tell us about the community? There are both English and Spanish speakers who live there. So I make a conclusion that this is a diverse neighborhood. That means that there are people of different backgrounds living there, and they are all working together. By the end of July, Marisol's plant had grown way over her head. And then at the very top, Marisol saw a bud. It became fatter every day. She couldn't wait for it to open. Now don't be looking so hard, Mrs. Willie Mae chuckled. It's gonna open up behind your back just when you're thinking about something else. One morning, Marisol saw an amazing sight from halfway down the block. She ran the rest of the way. Standing higher than all the plants and vines in the garden was a flower as big as a plate. Her bud had turned into petals of yellow and gold. A sunflower, Mrs. Anderson exclaimed as she pushed her shopping cart by. Reminds me of when I was a girl in Kansas. Mrs. Majewski was rushing on her way to the subway, but she skidded to a stop. I don't know if I said that word right. So pretty in the fields of Poland. So I noticed that before the garden was bringing people together, and when I look at the illustrations, I see signs of this happening. Because Marisol waits for the buds to open, but she also stands next to a woman who is also looking at the plant. This woman's arm is around Marisol. So this garden has brought the two of them together. So see, if you look at this picture right here, looks like this must be Marisol because it said that the lady had her arms around it. So maybe they didn't know each other before, but they're both wondering, what in the world is this thing going to be right here? Old Mrs. Garcia shook her head. No, no los girasoles from Mexico, where they bring joy to the roadside. I guess sunflowers make themselves right at home in every sun-kissed place on earth, Mrs. Willie Mae Washington said. Even right here in New York City, Marisol said proudly. The flower was a glowing circle, brighter than a yellow taxi, a flower of sunshine. Marisol thought the happiest plant in the garden of happiness all summer long and made the people on the street stop and smile. Ah, trying to get this picture. See if we can zoom in on this picture and look at it a little closer. Let's just look at this picture. When I'm reading and I'm looking at the illustrations, it's helping me understand the text. This shows that the sunflower made itself at home in New York City, right next to the streets that's full of cars. So it just was so beautiful, and everybody's looking at it. I wonder, so as I'm reading this, I have to ask myself, why is Marisol sunflower so important? And what does it do to this community? Right? It brings people happiness when people drive by it or walk by it. Look how happy this little dog is right here. Okay? So it made a difference to her community by bringing people together. Marisol watered and watered until a stream ran down the sidewalk, but her flower's leaves began to fall. Please get well again, Marisol whispered. Every day, more garden petals curled and faded. My sunflower is sick, Marisol cried. What should I do? Oh, child, Mrs. Willie Mae Washington said, its season is over. There's a time to bloom and a time to die. No, I don't want my flower to die. Mi cariño, don't cry, Mrs. Rodriguez said. That's the way of a garden. You must save the seeds and plant again next spring. Marisol's flower drooped to the ground. The garden of happiness wasn't happy for her anymore. The vines had tumbled down. The bushy green plants were gone. She collected the seeds and put them in her pocket, but spring was much too far away. How do we think she's feeling now? Do we think she's still happy? She couldn't understand why her flowers were dying, so Mrs. Rodriguez had to explain to her that during the different seasons, so we have, what are our different seasons? We have what? We have winter, what else? Summer, we have spring and fall. So she was telling her that her flower's gonna die, but it should come back when the season comes back around. Marisol was too sad to go to the empty lot anymore. For a whole week, she couldn't even look down the block where her beautiful flower used to be. Uh-oh. So in the last page, it looked like we were in the season of summer. What season do you think we're in right here? Winter. So then one day she heard people calling her name. Marisol, come quick! Marisol, hurry! I wonder what we think is gonna happen next. I wonder why these people are calling her name for her to hurry up and come quick. As golden haze shone on the street, there was a big crowd like on a holiday. Music from the bodega was loud and bright, and what she saw made Marisol laugh and dance and clap her hands. So did her flower actually grow back? No, if we look at this isn't, it looks like her flower, but it's actually a what? It's one of the words that we went over today for our vocabulary, and it started with an M. It's a mural. So her people in her neighborhood, they came together because they saw that she was so sad, and they painted her a mural. That's really sweet. All right. So that is the end of our story.